First of all, thank you, Bronwen, for coming to discuss with us legal issues from Davenports Harbour lawyers. Bronwen, the first thing I want to ask you is, how are you all coping? I can't imagine how difficult it must be to have the kind of phone calls from businesses at the moment. What's it like?
Yeah, it is stressful. A lot of businesses, especially small to medium businesses, are finding the current climate extremely stressful. Yeah. And there's a huge element of the unknown that contributes to that. So this is uncharted waters, essentially. Yeah. We haven't been here before. This type of pandemic we haven't had affect New Zealanders before. And so that uncertainty, I think, creates and generates a lot of fear and panic.
It is, isn't it? It's fear that you must be the front line of what you're getting is people very frightened to even ask the questions, which is why Business North Harbour has asked you to come here today. Look, let's be realistic. We're not going to be able to answer every single question, okay? And we're not probably going to be able to go down into the depth that most people actually need. But let's start with the ABCs, right?
Sounds great.
So from your perspective, I'm going to start with absolute fundamental obligations. So the obligations under the Health and Safety Act, all right? I know people are hearing this. I know the news is full of it, but let's do some ABC common sense here. As an employer, what are you legally responsible for now, this minute?
Yep, it's a great question, Sian. So essentially the main focus of an employer's obligations is the Health and Safety at Work Act. So that came into force in 2015, and that requires the main duty for an employer as a PCBU. It requires employers to take all reasonable, practicable steps to ensure the health and safety of its workers.
Reasonable and practical. Give me some examples.
Sure. So also included in the Act specifically is that an employer must take steps to mitigate or eliminate or minimise the risk of infectious disease spreading.
So it's specifically in the law. Okay.
Yep. And so it hasn't been, I guess, that particular part of the Act hasn't been enforced or played out itself before, but it requires employers to specifically turn their minds to what they need to put in place within the workplace for their workers to ensure that they are A, eliminating or B, minimising the risk of the spread of infectious disease.
Okay, so now today, I would hope as we're having this conversation that outside these doors in the middle of an industrial estate that there are employers already doing this, right?
And I'm sure most are.
What is it? What does it look like? So if somebody's listening to you now and thinking, oh, what do you mean? What do you mean? What is it I should be doing? What is it?
Yep, good question. And I guess for the 95% who already have, this will be confirmation that what
they're doing the right thing.
That what they're doing is right. And so in order to take reasonable, practical steps, you need to think of what the ministry advises to employers. And they are providing communications regularly, almost daily, in different areas, travel or for employer specific. Or there's obviously been a big announcement about the wage subsidy and leave payment. And so it's ensuring that someone in the business from the leadership level is taking account of what's happening from the ministry and from the government and making sure that that's implemented in the workplace. So very, very basic level, there should have already been communications out to your team, out to your contractors, your workers, to let them know what they're required to do to make sure they are taking all steps to protect their own health and safety. So the basic stuff, all the hygiene stuff that we all now know so well. You know, we're required to practice some social distancing. There shouldn't be any hugs going on. There should be no handshakes going on. There should be hand sanitizer. We should have communicated to the team how they should be washing their hands to make sure that they're taking personal responsibility.
So I'm going to encapsulate this by saying, do not think that stating the obvious isn't necessary. Yes,
100%
and just because everybody else is saying it, don't presume that anybody in your organisation has heard it until you've said it and you have confirmation that everybody that's under your umbrella of care, protection, employment, call it what you like, you need as a leader to have evidence that everybody has got this information, that you don't presume that they're watching the news, you don't presume that they're plugged into the same forms of information that you are, that you have a legal and a fundamental duty of care to communicate with people in real time now.
That is spot on. And you've also, as the directors and officers in the business, you have personal liability around that. So you cannot contract out of that, you can't insure against it. As a director or officer, you are responsible for ensuring your employees know what reasonable practicable steps they are required to do and what you as an employer are taking steps around addressing. Yep.
Okay, tick. I think we've done that one. Okay, I'm going to skip now to the one that I think, from my perspective, and certainly from Business North Harbour, has been the one of the most prolific questions that's being asked is, okay, how do you as an employer look at paying somebody once the self-isolation, which I believe is one avenue, or the other one is illness itself, that they are ill, okay? So let's take the illness one first, yeah?
Yep.
I'm an employer. What do? What are my responsibilities, and how do I support a member of staff in the legal right way?
Yep, and similarly, we are getting numerous questions from employers around this. So it's a common question that there's a lot of uncertainty around. Hopefully I can provide some certainty. And certainly I'll preface this by saying the advice I would have given last week is different to the advice I'm giving today because the landscape's changed, the ministry's advice has changed. So currently we have some clarity. So on Tuesday, the government provided information around the business economic package, which included a COVID-19 leave payment, which is exactly to cover the scenario you're talking about. It's to try and prevent there being hundreds and thousands of New Zealand businesses who have workers in isolation and they're not getting paid, and what the economic ramification of that would be. So essentially what happens, you've got someone who's sick. First step is, of course, your sick leave policy applies. So anyone who's sick within the workplace is entitled to sick leave if they've got it and if they qualify under the Holidays Act. So that's the first step. If someone's sick, sick leave applies. So then the question, I guess, arises is what happens if the sick leave runs out and they're still required to be in self-isolation? So essentially the steps are, first step if you're sick is sick leave applies. Second step is you could talk to the employee to see whether they want to take annual leave. That has to be by agreement. It's certainly not something an employer can force on an employee, but that might be a way that both parties agree to cover some more of that time away from the office when they're in self-isolation. The third thing would be if someone's still sick and still in self-isolation and there's no more sick leave and there's no annual leave to cover it, an employer could and probably should turn their mind to whether they can provide special paid leave. So the Ministry of Health has certainly issued a directive around employers turning their mind to see whether they can provide special paid leave. If they can't, we now have certainty from the government that there's the COVID-19 leave payment. That's your stopgap. That's a flat amount for either part-time or full-time workers that will be paid to the employer but then passed directly to the employee who's off in self-isolation and can't work.
Okay, I'm loving this. You're answering all the questions I want. The bit I want to ask you is, how do I, as an employer, access that from the government? Yes? I think you've described the flow chart brilliantly. I'm able to follow it. I know who I am, where I am. I can fit all into that. But once we do hit that part, what's the process?
So the employer applies.
Right.
So there's some confusion out there that it's an employee payment benefit, and so the employee applies. That's not the case. The employer applies, and perhaps we could put a link with this video on the website because it's an online link that you can access to then apply. It's relatively straightforward.
Brilliant.
So that's the scenario if you're sick.
Right.
And I guess the second scenario is if for precautionary measures perhaps you're required by the ministry to self-isolate.
Right.
Then what happens? So of course the person's not sick, so of course sick leave doesn't apply, so that's out of the equation. Then I guess following that same kind of mental flow chart, you could talk to the employee to see whether annual leave might apply. Again, an employer cannot force this on an employee, but by agreement that might be a way of covering some of that time away from the office. Although a first step would probably be, for lots of organisations, if you can work from home, that should probably be your first port of call. So you're not sick, but you're in self-isolation. Can you work from home? Can you still be productive? Can you still, therefore, receive your normal wage? And that will help the economy generally, but also that business specifically. So that's, I guess, your first step. If you're not sick, you're in self-isolation, can you work from home? If so, we're sorted. If not, then perhaps annual leave might apply. If it doesn't, the owner and the employer should consider whether special leave applies. If none of those options are available, then you've got your backstop, which is your leave payment from the government.
Okay.
Just on that leave payment, so there's the government's tried to make it as simple as possible. So there's one flat rate if you're part-time, there's one flat rate if you're full-time. And so the scenario might unfold where, say you were in self-isolation, so you're not sick, you've gone through your flow chart, and the only payment available is the
Which
COVID.
is to pay the rent and put food on the table.
Exactly.
So let's get real here.
That's
These
it.
are not added extras. That is,
No, it's not.
These are when people need money for fundamental needs.
Yep,
Yeah?
and it's to prevent you being on unpaid leave.
Lovely, okay.
So say we're in that situation and the flat rate from the government, which I think is $585.80 off the top of my head, say that's the amount that you get because you're full-time. Now it might be that's per week, so for lots of people there'll be a gap between what they should or usually would have earned and what the government payment is. And so again, there's a request or a plea to employers where they can to top up the difference. Yes. But if an employer can't, if there's absolutely no way that that's feasible, then that is the baseline payment for the worker. A couple of things about the COVID-19 leave payment. It does not apply to anyone who has travelled since the weekend's tightening of restrictions. So if someone decided to go on an overseas travel that was non-essential, they weren't critical health people or anything like that, helping somewhere else, if the employee went on travel and came back, the COVID leave payment is not on option. And it's essentially the government saying you shouldn't have gone.
You made a choice.
We told you, non-essential travel.
Bronwen, one of the questions I want to ask you now is, the information you've given us now is specifically for small to medium-sized businesses. Can we now look at sole traders? Is the advice the same? Is the process the same? So what do I do if I'm a sole trader?
Yep, good question. And I guess taking a small step back, so when Grant Robertson announced the package, he specifically said this is mainly targeting small to medium-sized business, and I think he used the example of a taxi driver sole trader. So absolutely, the COVID-19 payment applies for employers, contractors, sole traders, or if you're self-employed. So it applies to all of those groups of people. The amount's the same. Again, the government's just trying to be as efficient as possible and providing two options, part-time or full-time. But yes, absolutely, the sole traders and the contractors will be able to apply for and receive that payment.
And again, can we just remind people who are watching or listening to this, how do they go about doing that?
So there'll be an online form, and perhaps if we have a link on the Business North Harbour page, that would be helpful. But it's easy. And just a quick reminder that there's the COVID-19 leave payment, but there's also the wage subsidy payment. Both of those payments are aimed to ensure that people can, whenever possible, that businesses retain staff rather than leave them, rather than lose them.
And I'm going to say this, and this might be the world according to Sean, as a leader of any organisation, it's now time for you to step up and lean in. And this is the evidence of how you care and protect for people. I know, I'm on the board of several companies, I know there is a tipping point where you haven't got it to give, but it's not just money, it's about the quality of communication, it's your openness and your honesty in the way in which you're communicating with people at this time of trouble.
And I think it's important for business owners to, understand and then accept that they've got staff who are worried and frightened, and the unknown element comes into it again. They've got rent, they've got food to pay for families, and there's a interesting dichotomy for the employer who also has all of those stresses. But as an employer, they're required to be reassuring. They're required to have a plan in place. And that they are actually required to have a business plan in place if they want to apply for that wage subsidy. So as an employer, I guess my leadership advice is you need to be turning your head to what's going on. You need to be having some kind of leadership discussion and governance discussion around what's our plan B, what's our business continuity plan around how to cope if some part of our premises gets shut down because of infection, or if there is a government shutdown, whether it's 2 days or whether it's 2 weeks, in the near future, so that we are prepared. And you're required to do that from a leadership perspective, I would suggest, but also if you're wanting to take advantage of the wage subsidy payment from the government, you're required to have done that as well.
Okay, really, on the point advice. Leaders, stand up and be counted now. Yeah, be present,
Be
lean
present.
in and be there. And it's going to be messy and it's going to be difficult. I'm not belittling how challenging it is for you. But frankly, there isn't a choice. This is what your job is.
Yep, it is, and it's happening. It's happening out there. It's happening. We're a little bit rippling behind some of the other countries, of course, but it's happening. I would suggest that New Zealanders are probably lots of us were probably quite blasé, 3 weeks ago.
Absolutely,
it's absolutely not the case.
And that's
now.
the conversation I'm having with companies all over the place. You just got to look at what is happening in Italy, in Spain.
Yep.
This isn't an if, this is a when. Yeah?
It is.
So the business North Harbour, again, this is a community that people can lean into. And certainly, Bronwen, from the information, they can be absolutely assured that they are having the latest information that is absolutely what they need to be hearing. Yeah, that this is the quality information. And again, from a leadership position, just be very careful who you're going to be listening to. And what we're saying here, we're setting our stall out loud and clear that Business North Harbour, the people that they are presenting to you, know what they are talking about. I'm feeling more confident every time you ask more questions. Right, we're going to finish this bit of the interview, and we're going to start another one in a minute on redundancy.
Sure.
And again, to the viewers who are listening and watching this, there's a very real reason why we're doing this, because although we've talked about, the processes for illness and leave, whatever road you're taking, redundancy now is becoming a very stark reality, and this isn't something any of us can body swerve, and uncomfortable and difficult as it is, hence why we're going to give it some time all on its own.
I think it's a good idea.
Okay.